What's up, everybody? It's Chris Curls. This is the Highest Underground Show, and I am continuing reading the book, The Iron Curtain Over America by John Beatty. And we are on Chapter 7. And the title for Chapter 7 is, Does the National Democratic Party Want War? Does the National Democratic Party want war? All right, y'all, let's talk about it. Here we go. Since the suspension of the Age of Honor in 1933, those few patriotic Americans who, as linguists, astute historians, or intelligence officers, have been privileged to look behind our iron curtain of censorship have had the shock of many times seeing the selfish wishes of a gang or a minority placed ahead of the welfare of the United States. The attempts of those writers and speakers who have tried to share the truth with their fellow citizens have, however, been largely in vain. Publishers and periodicals characteristically refuse to print books and articles that present vital, whole truths. Sounds like today. Sounds like social media. They didn't have it back then, but it sounds like social media. If anybody who's they call it conspiracy theories or anything that's not part of the game plan of what they're trying to do, going against the grain. The right-wing conservative viewpoints are getting shut down. And this book was written in 1950, y'all. A lot of things are going to sound very, very familiar as what's going on today and what's happening today. They've been at this for a long time, y'all. This is nothing new. All right. Patriotic truth tellers who somehow achieve print are subject to calumny. Quote by General MacArthur, I have been warned by many that an outspoken course, even if it be solely of truth, will bring down upon my head ruthless retaliation, that efforts will be made to destroy public faith in the integrity of my views, not by force of just argument, but by the application of the false methods of propaganda. Those who, the end of quote, and that was General MacArthur in his speech to the Massachusetts legislature in Boston on July 25th, 1951. So this stuff was happening all the way in 1951. And guys, this is a general of the United States. This is not just a regular person. They were censoring and punishing and ostracizing people who went against the grain back then. Basically, patriotic Americans. Why is the average American deceived by such propaganda? He has been taught in the various and devious ways of censorship to see no evil except in his own kind. For on radio and in the motion picture, the villain is by regular routine a man of native stock. Ashamed and bewildered then, the poor American citizen takes his position more or less unconsciously against his own people and against the truth, and thereby against the traditions of Western Christian civilization, which are or were the traditions of the United States. It must not be forgotten for a moment, however, that it was the Savior himself, talking about Jesus, who said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The average citizen of native stock needs nothing so much as to experience the purifying joy of realizing, of knowing that he is not the villain in America. When the slackening of censorship allows him to enjoy the restored freedom of seeing himself as a worthy man, which he is, he will learn also something about the forces which have deceived him in the last 40 or 50 years, which is crazy, because he's writing this in the 1950s and he's saying these forces have been at work for the last 40 or 50 years. Now, he's talking about the movies. When we see people in the movies, we don't realize it, but we have the good guy and the bad guy. The bad guy, what he's saying is, every bad guy in the movie is a white male American who is, in your mind, you're seeing the bad guy and relating it to yourself. So it's a subliminal, subconscious way of injecting the propaganda into your mind. Now let's get back to the book. The obvious conclusion to be drawn from the facts stated in Chapter 6 is that our foreign policy has had no steadfast principal aims apart from pleasing, as in its Palestine and German deals, the leftists, largely of Eastern European origin, who control the National Democratic Party. And he's talking about Eastern European Jews. Can this be true? If a war should seem necessary to please certain Democrats, to establish controls, and to give the party an indefinite tenure in office, would our leaders go that far? Despite the pervasive influence of censorship, many Americans think so. A member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Lawrence H. Smith of Wisconsin, charged in 1951 that President Truman, Secretary Atchison, and General Marshall, at that time Secretary of Defense, were conjuring up another war. In an article in National Republic, Congressman B. Carroll Reese of Tennessee gave the history of the Democratic Party as the war party. This haunting, terrible question is expressed as follows by E.B. Gallagher in the Clover Business Letter for August 1951. Quote, as we should all know by this time, when the New Deal was about to crack up in 1941, Roosevelt, to save his hide, deliberately got us into World War II in order to give us something else to think about. The propaganda at that time, due to the global nature of the war, was don't swap horses when crossing a stream. On this fake propaganda, he succeeded in getting himself elected once again. Now I wonder if history is not repeating itself, this time in a slightly different form. Could it be possible that Truman, seeing the handwriting on the wall for his fair deal, deliberately started the Korean War in order to ensure himself of the necessary power to become a dictator? If he could do this, the 1952 elections would become a farce, and his election would become assured. End of quote. Now, they're saying this, that to get people not to focus on the New Deal, which is a piece of shit, it was basically, he was ruling in favor of the bankers, and they try to say that he was putting limitations on the bankers while letting the bankers write what their limitations would be, okay? Roosevelt was from a banking family. He helped the bankers. He was a sorry-ass, crippled piece of shit of American who should have hung from his wheelchair, or in his wheelchair, from the gallows. All right, let's get back. Let us then objectively examine the question, does the National Democratic Party want war? Let it be noted explicitly at the outset that the question refers to the controllers of the National Democratic Party and not to the millions of individual Democrats, Northern and Southern, including many senators, congressmen, and other officials, whose basic patriotism cannot and should not be challenged. Their wrong judging is based on an ignorance which is the product of censorship. Chapter 5, in censorship, let me see here. The wrong judging is based on an ignorance which is the product of censorship and is not allied to willful treason. Now he's saying this, that obviously the controllers of the National Democratic Party are the ones who make all decisions, which is like now. And these people, majority are Eastern European Jews or descended from there, which is descendant you still are, or whatever it is. Now, it's not all of it, and that's what he's saying. It's not the millions of individual Democrats throughout the country, Northern and Southern. It's the few people at the top who are running things. And he says that if there are congressmen back then, I guess, who were Democrats, who were patriots. I would say now there are none. Not one. And hardly any members of Congress are patriots to me. Not for the American people. They're patriots for the bankers and for the corporations and for the wealthy elite, but not for the American people. All right. We shall examine in order the testimony. We shall examine in order, A, the testimony of mathematics, B, the temptation of the bureaucracy builder, and C, the politician's fear of dwindling electoral majorities. The chapter is concluded by special attention to two additional topics, D and E, closely related to the question of safeguarding the Democratic Party's tenure by war. All right, so A, the testimony of mathematics. I hope I can remember all of these. I have to go back to this page, but I guess this is the testimony of mathematics. Let's see what he has to say. In the first half of this century, the United States had 5 Republican presidents with no wars and 3 Democratic presidents with 3 wars. Such a succession of 8 coincidences under the laws of mathematics would happen once in 256 times. Even if against such odds, this fact could be considered a coincidence. The Democrats are still condemned by chronology. They have no alibi of inheriting these wars, which broke out respectively in the 5th year of Woodrow Wilson, in the 9th year of Franklin Roosevelt, and in the 5th year of Mr. Truman. In each case, there was plenty of time to head off a war by policy or preparedness, or both. Mathematics thus clearly suggests that the behind-the-scenes leaders of the Democratic Party have a strong predilection for solving their problems and fulfilling their obligations by war. B, the temptation of the bureaucracy builder. A war inevitably leads to a rapid increase in the number of controls. The first result of controls is the enlargement of the bureaucracy. Defense emergency gives the Democrats a chance to build up for 1952. There are plenty of jobs for good party regulars. This was an article written in Newsweek and World Report in 1951. But just as an innocent-looking egg may hatch a serpent, controls may produce a dictator, and once a dictator is in power, no one, as shown in the case of Hitler, can chart his mad course. Nevertheless, these controls and this centralization of bureaucratic power urged by Mr. Truman as a fair deal program are so dear to many socialistically inclined Democrats, Eastern Europeans, and others that they may be willing to pay for them in young men's blood. This sacrifice of blood for what you want is nothing startling. In the Revolutionary War, for instance, our forefathers sacrificed blood for national independence, and we need not be surprised that others are willing to make the same sacrifice for what they want, namely a socialist bureaucracy. The blood sacrifice, moreover, will not be made by these young male immigrants who are arriving from Eastern Europe as students or visitors or as undetected illegal entrants. Many students and visitors have in the past found a way to remain. Young immigrants in these categories who manage to remain and the illegal entrants are likely to have passed the age of 25 and probable exemption from the military draft before cognizance is taken of their situation. Newcomer aliens all too frequently slip into jobs that might have been held by those who died in Korea! Exclamation point. Now that is something to say. So you have all these Eastern Europeans and these immigrants, mainly, like I said, a lot of them Jews, and coming over here and urging us into a war since they hold high positions in our country. They control the Democratic Party through donations and lobbying. And he's saying that these people come over here and get our jobs, get your son and your daughter's jobs, while they're all fighting for your country, for freedom and independence for your country. And they die, and then these immigrants take over the positions and jobs that were meant for them. That's crazy. I never thought about the Korean War or anything like that, but I might have to do some research on that. Controls are usually introduced somewhat gradually and with an accompaniment of propaganda designed to deceive or lull the people. A return from absence gives an objective outlook, and it is thus not surprising that on touring America after his years in the Far East, General Douglas MacArthur saw more clearly than most people who remained in America the long strides we had made toward collectivism. In his speech at Cleveland in 1951, he testified that he had noted in this country, quote, our steady drift toward totalitarian rule with its suppression of those personal liberties which have formed the foundation stones to our political, economic, and social advance to national greatness. End of quote. Now that's crazy, y'all. This is a general in the U.S. Army, a war hero, World War II hero, who is calling out the censorship and the totalitarian rule of a few people on the many that's already happening in our government. So imagine where it is now. It's been 70 years later, and they've had full force, because the only people standing up to them back then was in 1950. No one's standing up to them now, and if they are, they're getting censored, banned, thrown in jail. Who knows? They get rid of them. And they do use violent tactics as well. So don't let them fool you. All right, getting back. It is significant that another American who stands at the utmost top of his profession arrived by a different road at a conclusion identical with that of General MacArthur. Oh, I can't wait to know who this is. In a speech entitled "The Camel's Nose is Under the Tent" before the Dallas chapter of the Society for the Advancement of Management on October 10th, 1951, Mr. Charles Irwin Wilson. Irwin is E-R-W-I-N, not I-R-W-I-N like normal. Mr. Charles Irwin Wilson, he's the president of General Motors. Let's see what... And General Motors, this FYI, was the largest single maker of armament in World War II. He gave Americans a much needed warning, and I quote from Mr. Charles Irwin Wilson, president of General Motors. The president of the Korean War and the defense program, however, is being used to justify more and more government restrictions and controls. It is being used to justify more and more state planning. It is being used to justify more and more policies that are inconsistent with the fundamentals of a free society. End of quote. I mean, guys, this is crazy. I mean, you won't see a president of any major corporation talking like this now. So, getting back, the subject of bureaucratic controls cannot be dropped without the testimony of an able and patriotic American, Alfred E. Smith of New York. At the first annual banquet of the American Liberty League, Governor Smith said, and I quote, "Just get the platform of the Democratic Party and get the platform of the Socialist Party and lay them down on your dining room table side by side. And get a heavy lead pencil and scratch out the word Democratic and scratch out the word Socialist. And let the two platforms lay there. And then study the record of the present administration up to date. After you have done that, make your mind up to pick up the platform that more nearly squares with the record, and you will have your hand on the socialist platform. It is not the first time in recorded history that a group of men have stolen the livery of the church to do the work of the devil." End of quote. Excuse me. Sorry, I had to let my dog in. All right, so that was Alfred E. Smith from New York speaking at the American Liberty League. And he's basically saying that the Democratic Party and the Socialist Party are one and the same. Scratch out the word Democrat, scratch out the word Socialist, and just look at what they're saying, and they basically are the same party. And we're talking about the Democratic Party in 1951, much less what they are now. Now they're full-on communists. They're full-on Marxist, socialist, communists, which is antithetical to a Western Christian society. And we need to wake up, and I think a lot of people are, especially with the protests at the Capitol. Everyone sees how the Republicans have turned on Trump and the fraud in the election. And they're going to be signing their political death warrants by doing this because the people are mad. People love Trump. They don't like this socialism bullshit, and they're not going to have it. You're going to have to force it on them, and that's going to create strife and war. And you better get ready for it because it's coming. After protesting the New Deal's arraignment of class against class and its draining the resources of our people in a common pool and redistributing them, not by any process of law, but by the whims of a bureaucratic autocracy, that was Governor Smith condemned the changing of the Democratic Party into a socialist party. Since this was said during Franklin Roosevelt's first term, Governor Smith is seen to have been not only a wise interpreter of the political scene, but a prophet whose vigorous, friendly warning was unheeded by the American people. In summary, let it be emphasized again that wars bring controls, and that some people in high places are so fond of controls that a war may appear a desirable means for establishing them. All right. C, the politicians' fear of dwindling electoral majorities. Finally, there is the Democratic controller politician's worry about the whittling down of his party from a majority to a minority status in the national elections of 1948 and 1950. In each of these elections, the Democratic failure to win a clear majority was slight but significant. In 1948, Truman received less than a majority of the popular vote cast, 24 million out of a total 48.5 million, being elected by a suitable distribution of the electoral vote, of which Henry Wallace, the fourth man, Strom Thurmond was the third, received none, though his electors polled more than 1 million popular votes. In 1950, the Democrats elected a majority of members of the House of Representatives, but the total vote of all Democratic candidates lacked 0.08% of being as large as the total vote of all the Republicans. Again, the Democratic Party remained in power by the mere distribution of votes. Here is where the grisly facts of Eastern European immigration enter the electoral vote picture. As shown in Chapter 3, the great majority of these immigrants joined the Democratic Party. They also have a marked tendency to settle in populous doubtful states in which a handful of individual votes may swing a large block of electoral votes. Moreover, the number of immigrants, Eastern Europeans and other is colossal. For a short account of the problem, read Displaced Persons, Facts versus Fiction, a statement by Senator Pat McCarran of Nevada, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee in the Senate on January 6 of 1950. Those interested in fuller details should read the Immigration and Naturalization Systems of the United States, referred to several times in Chapter 2 and elsewhere in this book. Let us now examine the significance of the fact that almost all recent Eastern European immigrants have joined the Democratic Party. Let us suppose that our present annual crop of immigrants adds each year a mere 1/3 votes to the Democratic Party, in gratitude for connivance at their admittance, if for no other reason. And let us suppose also that in a limited war, or because of occupation duties far from home, 500,000 Americans of native stock each year are either killed or prevented from becoming fathers because of absence from their wives or from the homes they would have established if they were not at war. The suggested figures of 300,000 and 500,000 are merely estimates, but they are extremely conservative. They are based not on a possible global war, but on our present world ventures only, including those in Korea, Japan, Okinawa, and Germany. It thus appears that the combination of our loosely administered immigration laws and our foreign policy is changing the basic nature of our population at the rate of more than 750,000 a year, 750,000 a year. In case of a worldwide war, there would be a rapid rise of the figure beyond 750,000. To help in an understanding of the significance of the decrease of the native population occasioned by war here, are for comparison some population results suffered by our principal opponent in World War II. In Germany, boys expected to leave school in 1952, 53, 54, 55, and 56 number respectively 836,000, 837,000, 897,000, 820,000, and 150,000. The final startling figure, which is for boys only, reflects the birth drop because of full-scale participation in World War II. Even so, German soldiers were nearer home and had more furloughs than will be possible for our men in Korea or elsewhere overseas, whether or not a full-scale World War III develops. It is thus seen that a combination of war deaths and fewer births among the native stock, along with the immigration of leftist aliens, might appear to some manipulators of the National Democratic Party as a highly desired way to a surer grip on power. To such people, the boon of being a wheel in an ever-rolling socialist machine might be worth more than the lives of soldiers snuffed out in the undertakings of Secretary of State Acheson or successor of similar ideology. All right, now we're getting on to Dean. He really didn't label what these were, but it's the next section. It is well to emphasize in this connection that the American sympathy for the Jewish refugees, so carefully whipped up in large segments of the press and the radio, is mostly unjustified as far as any hardship is concerned. Those refugees who arrived in Palestine were well armed or soon became well armed with weapons of Soviet or satellite origin and were able to take care of themselves by killing native Arabs or expelling them from their homes. Those Judaized Khazars arriving in the United States lost no time in forming an association of Jewish refugees and immigrants from Poland, which at once began to exert active political pressure. Many refugees were well heeled with funds, portable commodities, or spoils from the land of their origin. For instance, an article by the Scripps Howard special writer Henry J. Taylor in an editorial in the Washington Daily News of 1945 told of a cleanup by aliens, most of whom live in New York, of $800 million in profit on the New York Stock Exchange in the spring of 1945, to say nothing of real estate investments, commodity speculations, and private side deals, with no capital gains tax because of their favored status as aliens. The Congress soon passed legislation designed to plug such loopholes in our tax laws, but the politically favored alien remains a problem in the field of tax collections. So back then, we had almost $1 billion that wasn't taxed because these people made it on the stock exchange, but they were considered aliens and not citizens, although they were taking full advantage of all the rights of a citizen. Guys, these people have been doing this for, since our nation has started. In 1951, for instance, patriotic U.S. Customs Service officials detected several hundred thousands of dollars worth of diamonds in the hollow shoe heels and in the hollow luggage frames of a group of refugees. In one way or another, the average arriving refugee is in a matter of months or in a few years at most far better off economically than the millions of Native Americans whose relative status is lowered by the new aliens above them. Aliens for whom in many instances Native Americans perform menial work. This aspect of immigration has long bothered American-minded members of Congress. A report of the House Committee on Immigration and Naturalization of the 68th Congress expressed the following principle, quote, "Latecomers are in all fairness not entitled to special privileges over those who have arrived at an earlier date and thereby contributed more to the advancement of the nation." End of quote. And I agree with that. Someone who's been here for, their family's been here for 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 generations, they deserve more help than someone who's just come over here for 2 generations. I don't care if you were born here. I'm sorry. But this country was built by my ancestors, not yours. The non-Christian alien of Eastern European origin not only in many cases deserves no sympathy, except of course from those who cherish his ideological attachments and endorse his political purposes. He is also often a problem. His resistance to assimilation and his preferred nation within a nation status have already been discussed. Another objectionable feature of displaced persons suggested in the reference to smuggled diamonds is their all too frequent lack of respect for United States law. A large number of future immigrants actually flout our laws before arriving in this country. Investigating in Europe, Senator McCarran found that such laws as we had on displaced persons were brazenly violated. He reported to the Senate in a speech wanted a sound immigration policy for the United States on February 28, 1950, and I quote Senator McCarran from Wisconsin, "I have stated, and I repeat, that under the administration of the present act, persons seeking the status of displaced persons have resorted to fraud, misrepresentation, fictitious documents, and perjury in order to qualify for immigration into the United States. A responsible employee of the Displaced Persons Commission stated to me that he believed 1/3 of the displaced persons qualifying for immigration to the United States had qualified on the basis of false and fraudulent documents. A former official of Army intelligence in Germany testified before the full committee that certain voluntary agencies advised displaced persons on how they might best evade our immigration laws. What is more, I was advised by a high official of the Inspector General's Office of the European Command that they had, quote, positive evidence that 2 of the religious voluntary agencies have been guilty of the forgery of documents in their own offices." End of quote and end of quote. So they were misrepresenting themselves, perjuring themselves, creating fictitious documents so that they could get in, take advantage of our immigration laws. And not only that, they were teaching others to do it. It's the same thing that's going on now. You have offices and clinics in like Mexico City where they teach Mexican people who are immigrating, who are illegally to the United States, how to get free shit. I mean, we've been giving away, Americans, y'all need to wake up. We are being robbed at gunpoint by taking our taxes and giving it to people who don't deserve it. Members of Congress, their salary always tends to go up. Ours doesn't. They make, $100,000, $200,000 a year. Imagine that. So, all right, getting back. Senator McCarran quoted a letter from Sam E. Woods, he's American Consul General at Munich, to the Secretary of State, which tells that the alleged payment of 50 marks through the wife of the president of the Jewish committee of the town led to an investigation which showed that a number of displaced persons who had already departed for the United States had previously caused their police records in Schwandorf to be changed. The senator also gave evidence that the head of the Displaced Persons Commission at Frankfurt, in direct violation of the law, caused to be removed from files those documents which would prevent the acceptance of a displaced person as an immigrant. So there's basically people who were criminals. They were taking it out of their police reports and hiding the fact that they were criminals or they had done fucked up shit and to come into the United States. And the officials were helping them. Let me see here. Senator McCarran's findings were supported by overwhelming testimony. To cite one instance, Mr. Edward M. Slazak, a former assistant selector for the Displaced Persons Commission in Germany, testified before a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration that he was fired because he protested the admission of fake DPs through wholesale fraud and bribery. I don't know what DPs are. A displaced person, the fake displaced person. So people who were just wanting to come to the United States, they would say that they were a displaced person just so they could get here. They really, weren't affected by the war, or they still had a home to go to. They just wanted to come to the United States and take advantage of our system. In view of findings and testimony, Senator McCarran urged caution on the bill H.R. 4567 by Mr. Emanuel Celler of New York, which provided for more Jewish immigrants. Emanuel Celler also did the Hart-Celler Act of 1965, which basically started allowing people from brown and third world countries to flood into our country. Instead of our immigration laws how we had it before, it was mainly only people from Europe, Northern Europe, not even Eastern Europe. Eastern Europeans couldn't come. They were different. They weren't, like I said, you have these Eastern European Jews. They weren't Christian like us. They weren't, a lot of them, some were, but they were different. And they didn't have the same morals and values that we do. All right. Which provided for more Jewish immigrants at Mr. Truman's special request. The president said his recommendations were in favor of more Catholics and Jews, but the Catholic World stated editorially that Catholics were satisfied with the law as it was. Senator McCarran's efforts did not prevail. The Celler bill became public law 555 on the 81st Congress when signed by the president on June 16th of 1950. So this guy, Celler, has been pushing for this immigration shit for a long time. He did it in 1950, and he also did it, like I said, the Hart-Celler Act in 1965. So let me see here. It raised from 205,000 to 415,000 the number of refugees over and above quotas eligible legally to enter the United States. The McCarran-Walter bill, designed to regulate immigration in the national interest, was vetoed by President Truman, but became law when the Senate on June 27, 1952, followed the House in overriding the veto. So the House still overrode the veto, but Truman, who was a sellout to the Jews, did veto the immigration bill, which would prevent all of these Eastern European immigrants from coming into the country. In addition, an additional serious aspect of displaced persons is their disposition to cause trouble. Without exception, informed officials interviewed by the author as an intelligence officer in 1945 advised caution on the indiscriminate admission of refugees, plenty of whom were in difficulty in their own lands for actual crimes and not for their political views. So what he's saying is that these refugees could have just been regular people trying to come into the United States, and a lot of them were criminals and like actual crimes, not just their dissenting political views during the war. Further light on refugees, Jewish and other, in the period following VE Day is furnished by Major Harold Zink, a former consulate on U.S. policy in Germany, in his book American Military Government in Germany. I have to do this. I'd like to read that book. It was called The American Military Government in Germany. After stating that displaced persons gave military government more trouble than any other problem, and mentioning the agitation to the end that the best German houses be cleared of their occupants and placed at the disposal of displaced persons, especially the Jews, Professor Zink continues as follows, quote, "Moreover, the displaced persons continued their underground war with the German population, with German property looted, German lives lost, and German women raped almost every day by the displaced persons. Widespread resentment developed among the populace, especially when they could not defend themselves against the firearms which the displaced persons managed to obtain." End of quote. So basically, these displaced persons in Germany who may or may not have been in the slave labor camps were looting, killing, and raping the German people and property. All right. Eastern European displaced persons, their associates, and their offspring do not always lose on arriving in hospitable America their tendency to cause trouble. Okay, good. They don't lose their tendency to cause trouble just when they arrive in America. In a review of the Atom Spies by author Pilat, P-I-L-A-T, Pilat, the New Yorker states that, quote, "The most important people involved, Klaus Fuchs, David Greenglass, the Julius Rosenbergs, Harry Gold, and Morton Sobel, were not professional spies, and they weren't much interested in money, end of quote. The review concludes by emphasizing the clear and continuing danger of having among us an amorphous group of people who can be persuaded at any time to betray their country for what they are told are super patriotic reasons. Now, that's what I'm saying. You know, Jews are always a nation within a nation. And what he's saying here is you have a entire huge population of Jewish people in the United States around this time who, if the leaders of these Jewish people, the rabbis, tell them to do something that's antithetical to the interest of the American people in the country, it's okay, because they have to be patriotic to the Jews first and then to their country, if they're even patriotic to their country. They don't seem to be. It's always they're only patriotic to themselves. They have a high in-group preference, which everyone should have. We should copy that. All right, getting back. An understanding of Zionism as a super patriotic force with the focus of interest outside of and alien to America can be had from an editorial signed by Father Ralph Gorman in The Sign. And this was in November of 1951, and I quote, "Zionism is not, at present at least, a humanitarian movement designed to help unfortunate Jewish refugees. It is a political and military organization based squarely on race, religion, and nation, using brute force against an innocent people as the instrument for the execution of its policies." Wow. It's not a humanitarian movement designed to help unfortunate refugees. It is a political and military organization based squarely on race, religion, and nation, using brute force against an innocent people as the instrument for the execution of its policies. I'm sorry I had to read that twice because it's just insane that, you know, you had a Catholic priest saying this. And getting back to the rest of the quote. "The Israelis have already carved a state out of Arab land and have driven 750,000 Arabs out of their home into exile. Now they look with covetous eyes on the rest of Palestine and even the territory across the Jordan. The Arabs are not fools. They realize what is being prepared for them. With American approval and money, they know that the sword is aimed at them and that unless Zionist plans are frustrated, they will be driven back step by step into the desert. Their lands, homes, vineyards, and farms taken over by an alien people brought from the ends of the earth for this purpose." End of quote. Even worse in some aspects is a political philosophy put into practice by drives to sell Israeli bonds, nationwide propaganda, etc., to the effect that, quote, "Israel is supposed to have a unique jurisdiction over the 10 million to 12 million Jews who live in every country of the world outside it." End of quote. That was Mr. William Zuckerman reporting in the Jewish newsletter on the recent World Zionist Congress held in Jerusalem. In view of the passages just quoted, why are America's leftists so anxious for many more refugees? Can there be any conceivable reason except for the eager anticipation of their future votes? Can there be any motives other than anti-American in the opposition to the McCarran-Walter Law? Moreover, can anyone believe that continued subservience to Israel is another subservience to Israeli aims is other than an invitation to war in the Middle East, a war which we would probably lose? And this is funny that he was saying this in 1950 because we all know the two Gulf Wars that we have and all the conflicts that we've had since then that we have instigated and that we have helped to start, financed, contributed to with weapons, guns, soldiers, equipment, information. Guys, this is funny because they were calling it what would happen back then, and all these things have happened. And that's why I love to read these older books, because these older books were written at the time when all of this shit was going on. And you had true Americans then who were standing up, and they saw the problems with immigrating people here who are nothing like Americans, who are basically not white. These people may have whiter skin, but they were Eastern European Jews. They weren't the same religion, they weren't the same culture, and they weren't the same people. All right, getting back. Let us once more consider the foreign policy which is responsible for our present peril. Could it be that those who pull the strings from hidden seats behind the scenes want Americans to be killed in Korea indefinitely and for no purpose? Want the Arab world to turn against us? Want a few 100,000 young Americans killed in Germany? And want the reviving German state destroyed lest it somehow become again a bulwark against the present pagan rulers of Eastern Europe and Northern Asia? Such an eventuality, of course, would be used to bring in from here and there, as in World War II, a great new horde of politically dependable refugees, a boon to all leftists, a boon so great that no further challenge to their power could be conceivable. And that's how it almost is right now. In answering the question, do those who pull the strings really want war? Remember that the Soviet manpower reserves are many times greater than ours. Their birth rate is nearly twice as high. They have millions of Chinese and other puppets willing to fight for rice and clothing. Without reserves from Asia, however, the Soviet strength in the European theater in 1951 was estimated by General Bonner Fellers as 175 divisions, some 25 of which were armored. In the Soviets' favor also is the nature and extent of Soviet territory, which is characterized by miles and miles of marshes in summer and impenetrable snow in winter. The vast inhospitable areas of Russia caused even the tremendous Europe-based armies of Napoleon and Hitler to bog down to ultimate defeat. Napoleon and Hitler tried to invade Russia and it didn't work, and they always say that because they have crazy weather. You know, you never attack Russia in the spring or the winter. The spring, when the snow melts, you have marshes and rains, and all the trucks and equipment and tanks were getting stuck. And, you know, in the winter, the snow and the cold and the famine and the disease and people getting sick. The thing is, you know, two lessons I've learned with great generals and great armies: don't invade Russia. The long-range Soviet strategic aim, according to Stalin, is to induce the United States to follow a policy of self-destruction, and that goal can be best accomplished by our engaging in extended land warfare far from home. Here is testimony from a speech recently delivered at Brown University by Admiral Harry E. Yarnell, a former commander-in-chief of the United States Asiatic Fleet. Quote, "To a Russian war planner, the ideal situation would be a campaign against the Allies in Western Europe, where their army can be used to the greatest advantage, while their submarines can operate not far from home bases against the supply lines from the United States to Europe." End of quote. Moreover, in answering the question, do those who pull the hidden strings want war, Americans, and particularly women, must remember, alas, that America is no longer a preeminently Christian and conservative nation, as General MacArthur described it in a speech to the Rainbow Division as his career as Chief of Staff of the Army was ending. Americans who adhere doggedly to the idea that traditional Christianity should not disappear from our land must beware of the fallacy of thinking that because they are merciful, other people are merciful. Mercy towards all mankind is a product of Christianity and is absent from the dialectic materialism of the new rulers of Russia, whose tentacles reach to so many countries. Apart from Christ's Sermon on the Mount, the most famous passage on mercy in the English language is Shakespeare's The Quality of Mercy. It has been widely suppressed, along with the teaching of the play The Merchant of Venice, which contains it. Now, The Merchant of Venice was a play by Shakespeare where it was basically, you know, the Jews say it's anti-Semitic, which basically this means that it's a good-ass play. It is thus well to reflect constantly that Soviet leaders are moved by no consideration of humanity, as the term is understood in the Christian West. Instead of relieving a famine, the rulers of Russia are reported to have let millions of Russians die in order to restore in a given province or oblast, that's just a region in Russia, a safe balance between productivity and population. An oblast is O-B-L-A-S-T, and it's just, I guess, one of the things that like a region or province or a state within Russia. Similarly, according to Chinese nationalist sources and others, the Chinese communists, backed by Russia, have decided that they must accomplish the eventual extermination of 150 million Chinese to reduce Chinese population, now between 450 million and 475 million, to more manageable proportions, which is funny because now China is over 1 billion people, so twice as much. This is necessary under the communist theory if China is to be a strong country with the permanent internal problem of hordes of people near starvation, or likely to be so by the ravages of drought and flood. This brings us again to the testimony before Congress by Secretary of Defense Marshall that our purpose in Korea was to bleed the Chinese until they got tired and cried halt. For Chinese communist leaders who need a population reduction of 150 million people, there is only delighted amusement in such U.S. official statements intended to justify our war policy and reassure the American public. Exclamation point. Equally amusing for them is the official U.S. statement that we are inflicting casualties much greater than those we are sustaining. Even apart from any Chinese communist population reduction policy, their present population is 3 times ours, and they have no plans, as we have, to use elements of their population to save Europe and police foreign areas! Exclamation point. Which is true. You know, that's where the Jews have used our government and our army to police the whole world the past 70 years. And you know, other countries who don't have to worry about that are obviously going to be a stronger army and going to, going to have less casualties. So the Kremlin laughter at our acceptance of continuing American casualties under such an insane motivation as bleeding the Chinese and our waste of material must have been even more hearty than that of the Chinese communists. Yet these appalling facts constituted the foreign policy of our top State Department and Defense Department leaders under the Acheson and Marshall regimes. It appears then that U.S. leftists, including those who control the National Democratic Party, want war, socialistic controls, and plenty of casualties, and not one fact known to the author points to the contrary. Full-scale war, of course, would be edged into in devious ways with carefully prepared propaganda calculated to fool average Americans, including ignorant and deluded, basically patriotic people in the Democratic Party. There would, of course, be an iron curtain of complete censorship, government and other. Dazed by propaganda verbiage, American boys will not understand any more than when talking to General Eisenhower during World War II, but they will give their fair young lives. Quote, and it's a poem. Theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Theirs is Theirs. Greater love hath no man than this, said the Savior, that a man lay down his life for his friends. But nowhere in Scripture or in history is there a justification for wasting precious young life in the furtherance of sinister political purposes. All right, guys, that was chapter 7. Thank you. I'm going to be back with chapter 8, cleaning the Aegean stables.